Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Tropes. I'm Hannah.
I'm David, and we're talking genres, we're talking industry trends, we're talking Netflix hot topics, and
We're
hot topics
talking
maybe in general.
we're talking teen rom-coms on Netflix. So much
Yeah,
kissing.
so much kissing. Really just sexless kissing and then sexy kissing are like the two modes that Netflix operates under.
Just
Um, so I wanted to talk about this because it's becoming a thing. Like it wasn't a thing even 5 years ago.
it's
We've got this,
definitely become a thing in the last 5 years, I would agree.
yeah, and it's sort of a resurrection of a genre of film through a kind of renaissance of literature, right? Of a
Sort
type.
of, yes, yes, yes.
A renaissance of this genre of YA literature that's resulting in a lot of industry types saying we've reached this new level of the teen rom-com being not maybe not profitable in the way that we would think of if theaters were still around, but now that theaters are like dead, uh, having something to watch on your Netflix screens is super important. Uh,
Yeah,
and the the largest user base of Netflix is teenagers, young people,
right.
little ones, other
Little ones.
synonyms. Our
They're
youth.
like, okay, yeah. God. Like, I know we're getting
um,
old, but we're not that old.
well, I felt really old watching a lot of these because they do
Okay.
make you feel like kind of a creep, especially the more sexual ones, where you do have, of course, their 20 somethings always playing
Right.
these teens, but it's just like the overt sexuality is something that I didn't encounter very much you know, in my youth, my teenage years, I guess there was like Super Bad and there was Easy A,
Yeah.
which I see in your background if anyone's watching the video version of this podcast. But that was like the birth of like the raunchy comedy, and then that sort of
I mean,
replaced the teen rom com as like a tentpole film.
sure. Yeah. But I would say like that raunchy teen comedies, targeted specifically at teens, I guess were more of a 2000s thing. Like I would even include like Mean Girls in that, like it's a little bit
Sure, you
raunchier than like your average, like I don't know, but like is Heather's in the 80s was also very like
right. Well, that
raunchy and
was like a cult
provocative.
a cult classic. I mean, that was
Yeah.
did terribly box office at the time, and it thrived on video. But
Hmm.
there were a lot of in the 80s it was sort of a tentpole thing that you could release these big budget teen romances dramas, Teen Wolf. Let's
Right.
see. Um, what were all the Molly Ringwald ones? 16
Right.
Candles, Breakfast Club, the
Hmm.
John Hughes type movies, Ferris
Yeah.
Bueller. These are like the movies that I think a lot of the modern day producers are trying to replicate from their own childhoods. It's sort of a
Yeah.
40-year rule kind of thing,
Right.
that things
We're
come
now
come back around over time.
because all the people who were kids growing up with it, are now in positions of power. So of course they're
Exactly.
gonna get nostalgic for their own childhoods, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. But I mean, of course, that nostalgia, you don't even have to be alive for it to experience it. I mean, that's why
Sure.
Stranger Things was so powerful, so popular.
Absolutely.
And so I think
I
Netflix
mean,
as a brand is sort of built on this foundation of nostalgia for like the bygone eras of films that no longer can make it to theaters, but can survive on little streaming sites.
streaming. Right, right. And that nostalgia is what draws people in.
I was at a Q&A with Vincent Marcello, who directed both of the Kissing Booth movies.
Okay.
Um, and he was sort of describing how when he was pitching the movie, They weren't sure whether to give it to their like more adulty, sexy teen division or their more youth-oriented division, and they were sort of fighting over it, and that created like a slowdown in the production process. This like barrier to
Interesting.
overcome of being on the border of too sexy, not sexy enough.
Right. Like, are we going more Riverdale with this, or are we going a little bit more, Seventh Heaven? I don't know if that's teen, but there are teens in that show.
There are
Whatever.
teens there. If it's more High School Musical, basically, or
Yeah.
um, you know,
Gossip
or
Girl, Riverdale, Vampire
right,
Diaries,
yeah,
all these things.
um, and sort of, he was a director who came from, he did like Teen Beach Movie, and then
God.
he also had done other things like a short film called Zombie Prom with RuPaul that was very well received. But
Fascinating.
but the point was that he was sort of known for doing teen oriented musicals, and that he was like venturing into something more sexy, and so that was part of like this process of
Yeah.
matriculating all of these YA sort of, where there's a little more freedom in terms of what you can represent sexually, to the visual where it's very limited and people freak out if you get too sexualizing of young people.
Right. Yeah, well, so the guys are Matt Broadley and Ian Brickell, and there's an interview with them that in the Hollywood Reporter, and in this interview they're talking about how they are specifically like looking to all of these kind of new areas to basically revive a kind of dead genre,
Right.
and that this was not something that studios are really investing in anymore because the amount of return they were seeing just wasn't worth it compared to spending $5 trillion on 7 different versions of the same Justice League movie.
Right, at least not for theaters. And like you'll see that the ones of
Yes.
these in this genre that haven't been released on Netflix, they're on Hulu, they're on HBO Max a little bit, but not a lot yet, because HBO is still very much more adult oriented in their
Yeah.
target demo. And then iTunes. Some of these are sort of like the modern day direct to video
the Apple
release,
Plus,
but there's no video. So but they are an Apple Plus. They're not like exclusive to the streaming service. They're like pay $12.99 to watch this on iTunes. So I think that's interesting. Also, that there's no longer direct to video, but there are direct to video level productions, often based on Wattpad novels.
And it's, obviously the film industry plumbing the publishing industry for content is nothing new. It's always been this way, basically.
Right. But I think that over time, it definitely has gotten more so. The idea that like you can't produce a project unless it's been tested in some market, whether that's in literature or in like a web series or something. And the places that they're willing to look has broadened significantly, where it used to be like New York Times best-selling novels and literary fiction from the 18th century or earlier. Now it's more, you can get fan fiction. You can get fan fiction with the serial numbers filed off. It's a much wider spectrum.
Absolutely. And I think, the benefit of that is if you've got a fanfic that has, 100,000 views or more, the studio knows that you're coming in with a built-in audience. And like, that's kind of all that matters, especially for streaming, where, it's not so much, if you've got a good enough concept, we can hook other people on it. For streaming, it's like, we are the place to get this thing that you love, like that is kind of what like streaming has evolved into now that there's not just Netflix, now that there's Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and Apple Plus and HBO Max. You know, it's like they each need to have the thing that's going to draw someone in to get those subscription dollars, and they're competing against all of the other subscription service for that audience, basically.
Absolutely.
So if they know that like this is gonna and this is gonna get like 10,000 teens to make their parents like continue their Netflix subscription, then they will make it and it's worth it for them. And what's especially great, I think, industry wise about these movies is that they're relatively cheap to make, you know, because they're young actors. You don't necessarily need someone who's already got a ton of name recognition. Like some of them, like we'll see, like there are certainly exceptions and people who either break out in these Netflix movies or are brought in and then become sort of mainstays.
Yeah, let's not tease them. Let's just say, okay, so like Noah Centineo was made in this crucible of coming out of Disney, you know, Disney Channel stuff, and then he evolved out of that into Netflix stardom. He was a side character in Austin and Ally. You know,
was he? Okay.
Or not decom, sitcom, whatever you call those.
Right.
But the point
regardless,
is,
like
so Disney makes some stars that then go on to go into all of these different Netflix and streaming and
you know, you get like KG or KJ is it Applegate? I always forget. The guy who plays Archie on Riverdale, like he's in a bunch of these as well too. You know, like he's just like become teen heartthrob, and like that is what these movies are about, is capturing
and Netflix is all about like star production too. So you have things like Sierra Burgess, where they took the star from Stranger Things.
Well, the breakout Black Horse character.
What? Breakout Black Horse
or Dark Horse? Yeah,
the Dark Horse candidate.
Because she just played Barb. Barb gets killed off in like season 1.
No, I mean, but this is the point. Is like they try to reuse people who they see as like having potential, because they're all about like talent cultivation, and that's with writers and directors and all of these people. They're like, if we can get you one project, we're gonna try and get you 3, so you can really like test, you know, how viable you are.
And if you are viable, we hope that results in loyalty.
Right. And I think that the idea of testing things and being very experimental, because Netflix has all of the money, all of it, and they're willing to lose it. They're willing to lose most of it. And like, that's not a problem for them. So all of these movies, you know, the Netflix release schedule is that they'll release something, they'll target it at like who they think it should be targeted at. And then they'll give it a week, and then they'll see who's actually watching it. And then they'll identify all of the users and all of the users who are like kind of similar to that user. And if it's popular enough, they'll really push it to everybody. And if it's not, they'll just kind of bury it. Like, you know, there are so many movies on the list that like I watched like the trailer for, and I was like, I'd never seen this trailer before. It was never suggested to me. But, you know, To All the Boys, you know, you see ads for that on like the subway. You know, there's like real push for these things.
Yeah. And I mean, some of that I think has to do with how popular the IP that it's based off of was prior to Netflix. You know, like To All the Boys I Loved Before series was like huge in YA. It sold, it was constantly on the bestseller list for
I think
YA fiction.
I think you're definitely right about that. But the way that Netflix markets themselves is that they'll say, no, we give everyone a fighting chance, whether that's true or not. But they'll say, look, we put this out the first week, this many people clicked on it, and because of that, we decided this could go big internationally, and so we pushed it in this region and that region, and then it didn't do as well in this country, so we need to make a localized Indonesian rom-com because we didn't do well enough
crack that market one. Right.
No, I mean, seriously. So I mean, if you look on like the list of rom-coms and you start going further down it, obviously we don't get recommended the foreign language ones immediately, But you'll get like All the Freckles in the World is like a Mexican teen rom-com, because they really love teen rom-coms down there, but weren't as big on these, like, you know, Kissing Booth or whatever. And
Yeah.
then Oh Ramona is based on like a Romanian novel that was really
Okay.
popular in Romania or something, you know.
Yeah.
And then Love Like the Falling Rain is, I think, more of like a dramedy, teen dramedy thing, and it's in Indonesia. So it's like the different markets they can't break with our normal IP or our American IP, then we need to get
Right.
more localized versions.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, it's yeah. I feel like we could go on a whole rabbit hole about you know, foreign offerings on Netflix and what is and isn't available and what gets popular
Right.
and what,
and of course, you know,
doesn't.
what's successful gets sequels and spin-offs and
Yes.
you know, whatever. But
Totally.
yeah. And they also have to hit a broad spectrum, right? So like Kissing Booth, very, very different in tone from To All the Boys, very, very different in tone from like All the Right Places, which is going for a more prestige drama. Like they bring in Elle Fanning for that one because like we
Right.
need star power for this one. It can't
Yeah.
just sell itself on camp and fun.
Right, exactly. And you know, that's another one that was like a YA breakout. Like it had like somewhat prestigious like origins, especially compared to things like Kissing Booth or like After or something like that.
So like what's your perception of you know, how these certain IPs get popular in their niches and how that translates to popularity in film? I
I
know that's kind of a
mean,
big question.
yeah, this gigantic. If I had like the perfect answer to this, I would be a billionaire and would have written 20 novels by now.
Right. But like, do you see like there being like an or version of this, like an or rom-com YA book that sort of spawned a lot of these spin-offs, or do you attribute to Twilight popularity or?
I mean, I think Twilight probably has a lot to do with it. You know, I'm not familiar with how common it was. I mean, it's also because YA as a genre is still relatively new, you know, like it
When did what year would you say YA
I
became what it
mean,
is?
like the 90s are kind of when like YA became like a thing. Like maybe
Okay.
at some point in the 80s, like it was still mostly like picture books and then some like, you know, Ramona Quimby middle grade style,
Sure.
like super fudge and stuff like
And middle
that.
grade, that's a more recent term, right? Or
Yeah, or it's at least an industry term. So like that, you know, those are the books that you read anywhere between like second grade to it's sort of like just beyond chapter books, but not
right.
quite like YA novels
But
yet. So
were there
like,
any in like that were adapted into these teen rom-coms? Were there any of those that sort of bordered on middle grade or anything like that?
um,
You know,
oh
because it's
God,
like
like
Wattpad is different from you know
you
the
know,
traditional publishing, but
right.
it's not middle grade, even though it's written by sometimes 16, 15-year-old
I
authors.
mean, I would say like a big like if we're gonna point to like the biggest name in YA movies, it's John Green. You know, like there's no ifs, ands, or
Sure.
buts around that. And like he, I think, and his success, especially with The Fault in Our Stars, is what I think really one made room for these like dramatic teen movies.
Right.
So like
All the right
bright places
places.
like sort of fits more into that everything
And the half of it
everything the
to an
half of
extent.
it, yeah. um but then, you know, I think these like fun fun ones I think are very much just the teen versions of like 50 Shades of Grey a little bit, like, you
Right.
know,
Yeah,
it's
I think it draws on that same fanficky kind of mode of expression that's easily
right.
identifiable, but you can't always, you know, peg down like the limits of it because so much YA fiction is trope filled, but I think fanficky
Sure.
stuff, somehow feels sometimes a little bit more trope filled, sometimes a little bit more self-inserty, sometimes a little bit
Yeah.
more
I mean, especially, you know, like these like kissing booth style and you know, like the movie After, which was based on like a Harry
right.
Styles self-insert fanfic, you
Right.
know.
That one's not Netflix, but it
That
is
was not
very much in
Netflix.
that vein. And it's
Yeah.
is that Noah Centineo also?
No,
No,
it's not.
sorry.
It's someone else.
Getting it confused with like SPF 18 or
Right.
whatever.
It's all just like brown haired, adorable, square jawed dudes in their 20s. Like that's what all of this is.
Hmm. So we are a podcast called Talking Tropes, and I know sometimes we start to sound like talking industry or talking, other things
Anything
besides
except
tropes.
tropes. Just Stanley Tucci. We're just
But I think
Tucci
that this is a
tropes.
genre where we can really identify the tropes that make it up, the tropes that make it what it is, and we can really identify which tropes that aren't essential but do appear very commonly. And I think that the easiest way to do that is to look on TV tropes at one of the most trope filled entries on this list, which is the kissing booth.
Right. And is sort of stated you know, in that Hollywood Reporter article as kind of the kickoff, at least for Netflix, is
Yeah.
like whole shebang in this
Right. So,
genre.
even though they might not admit to this, maybe as they're looking at other scripts, they're like, can we add in some of the things that worked in Kissing Booth that people
Right.
liked? Things that might sort of spill over into these other productions, even though they're mostly independent, as far
Yeah.
as I know. Okay, so I have the tropes page open. One of the first ones listed is the actor illusion, not illusion, but illusion. They're alluding to the fact that Molly Ringwald was
Yeah.
in these 80s rom-coms, and now Molly Ringwald, they actually brought her in to play the friend's mom.
You know, it's very Winona Ryder in Stranger Things, you know.
Right, exactly. It's trying to make you aware of the nostalgia and aware of the reference, the genre awareness that they're going to be relying on.
Right. Because, you know, it like almost all media, I think, you know, now here in the 2020s, you know, audiences are very genre savvy and very trope aware, and media in general is very genre savvy and trope aware, and like certainly these movies are no exception.
Right. But I think that there's something even more to these because they're only being produced because everyone's had these scripts forever,
Right.
sitting on their shelves. And now they're just finally ready to, like, oh, finally we can do like a big 80s Ferris Bueller type movie again. Oh, finally we can do a 16 Candles again. Uh,
Right.
and, 16 Candles is like, um, one of the characters' favorite movies in Into All the Boys. It's
Right.
Laura Jean's favorite, right?
I think so, yeah.
And like they love these movies. They reference these movies. That's what's happening.
Right.
Um,
Which, you know, I think also feels real to the teens today.
yeah,
And
sure.
feels real to teens of like many eras. Like I remember my friends and I doing like 80s teen movie nights, you know, like we would
Hmm.
sit down and watch The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller and, you know, be like, these are the classics. Yes.
But at the same time, a
So
lot of these movies, I think, right now, like maybe not 5 or 10 years ago, but right now, are actually really
yeah.
difficult to find streaming. A lot of them have like a lot of copyrighted music that could be difficult to license. A lot of them have more problematic aspects to it that maybe people are more
Yeah.
hesitant to feature them on their sites. It's like
Mm-hmm.
Molly Ringwald published a piece about like the problematic things of those John Hughes movies and the tropes
Yeah.
and whatnot. So maybe it's like we're trying to do these movies again so that people can see a version of them that's more, cleaned up, a little bit more sanitized,
Mm-hmm.
or and
Yeah.
more topical, more relevant. Uh,
For sure, for sure.
Also, here's a trope that I think is really central to a lot of these movies: is all girls want bad boys, and I think that Noah, the character in the kissing booth, is like the epitome of the bad boy that the protagonist
Right.
falls for. He
Oh
beats
yeah.
people up. He's his basically his only trait that I know of is that he's like really protective of
Yeah.
Elle, and he's
He's
like
just
a fighter
violent.
guy who rides a motorcycle.
Yeah. Like and like especially with the kissing booth, you know, it certainly feels like a piece of fiction that was written by a 15-year-old, you know, and like that is both good
In
and
all of the best ways,
prob
I think. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it has that
Um
kind of fanficky purity to it, or you know,
like just innocence, you know, where it's
sure.
like you
Yeah,
you imagine
Vince Marcello called it a sweet sexuality, that it wasn't like lascivious. It was,
right.
you know, an obsession with like virginity and losing virginity in a way that could almost only be written by somebody who has just lost their virginity or who hasn't lost their
Or
virginity.
hasn't. Yeah, like that's the thing about a lot of fan fiction is, you know, it is not written necessarily by people who are sexually active but who want to be, and
Right.
have
Like the
like
imagined sexual
right,
experience more than
right, you know,
any
like
real lived dating experience.
absolutely, you know, like this is uh like pure wish fulfillment in so many ways, and I feel like, you know, that both comes from media that these kids have absorbed when they're writing it, and also just from, you know, desires that they're having as teens, and like there's definitely a sense of authenticity to that.
Right.
However,
Do you think
it's
any
not
of
a
that
lot
is
of
lost in the translation to, you know, these films? Because I think, unlike a lot of literary adaptations, I think there's more liberties taken with dialogue. Like, you hand it over to a professional dialogue writer, and you
right.
hand it off to somebody who like gets character dialogue more. And so that sort of authenticity of, you know, you're really cool, I like how cool you are, might be lost
But also
in.
it's like that authenticity in that specific way doesn't
Uh-huh.
necessarily make for good fiction and doesn't make for good
I think you're
media, you
probably
know.
right, but at the same time, there's a real inauthenticity to some of the dialogue in the kissing booth, which feels very, you
Absolutely.
know, Gen Xer writing or something. You know, trying to write youthfully, like the scene where Elle has just been sexually harassed by a student, and she expresses that by saying, "Dude, touch my lady bump," which she's referring to her ass. Which, I mean, everyone has an ass.
Yes.
Not much of a lady bump.
Yeah, but how many dudes got that juicy lady bump ass, David? Is I mean, some of them is the
But
answer.
dude touched my lady bump is like, I feel like something that I'm gonna remember for a long time,
Yeah, and
not
that no
necessarily
one
for its
actually says.
quality.
Right. No
And
teen
then
has
Tall
said
Girl was
that.
another one that I felt like had some real, you know, adult written dialogue. Uh,
Tall Girl
like
is a baffling
when
film.
when the popular girl says, "Stiggy baby, would you mind getting Mama a diet squish?" You know, it's an attempt to translate a YA sensibility to film for
Right.
a broader audience,
Right.
and trying to be funny, also kind of poking fun at the characters by making them say
Oh,
silly
sure.
things.
Right. And I mean, you know, lots of people also have complaints the other way with like the John Green style of doing things where, you know, instead of everyone sounding like super hip and or trying to sound super hip and teen, you know,
Right, everyone
everyone
just
low key
sounds
sounds
like
like
a
they're in
35
a
year old
philosophy.
depressed writer.
Right. But like, you know, as an angsty, intelligent teen myself, I was very much like, maybe this isn't how I talk, but it's how I wish I talked. Like, you know, like
Right.
it's how I think a lot of the time. And so I I personally prefer the John Green style of perhaps overwriting and like these kids versus the sort of more pop version where it's like, I don't know, what's the hip lingo today, kiddos? Like that feels way more cringe
anytime
to
any
me.
character in any movie says unsubscribed, I think this will be
Ugh.
very dated in a year, or it's already dated. But
It's already dated. Or any jokes about,
unsubscribed.
honestly, any jokes about Twitter too are just the worst. Like I think Moana
Emojis.
will emojis too, but I think Moana will continue to regret the tweet joke. But who knows?
Joke. All right, let's move on to some more juicy tropes.
Yes.
Almost all of these movies, I don't think I saw any that didn't have an alpha bitch character, as in like the popular girl who's above and beyond the main character, who surpasses her in every way. I don't think I saw a single one that didn't have this.
I mean, so like, I would say the half of it does not, but I think the half of it kind of falls outside of a lot of these general
Well,
tropes.
yeah, it's going for more prestige. It would sort of be borderline, but I would say, like even in To All the Boys, where the character is sort of like an ex-friend of Laura Jean, and then later becomes more friendly with her in the sequels. She still like embodies the idea of there's a girl, she's more popular than me with the boys I like her or liked her.
Right.
She's a little bit mean. She's a little bit, unfriendly in some way.
Right.
And often is just made to be
girl.
like a villain. If you need to have a villain in a story like this,
because everyone has had a mean girl. Level. Everyone's had a mean girl in their life. Everyone's had a bully of some kind. It's.
But I don't know if you could you identify one particular girl who embodied all of the hierarchies of your school? Like, I mean, we went to a pretty big high school, but
yeah. So a lot of the, specifics of, this is a 400 person high school and your graduating class is 100 people. So you just know everyone. Sure. Like that kind of nuance is, not exactly our high school experience.
But I guess I just would imagine that a lot of people's experience is that you couldn't really identify one singular bully, popular, hot girl.
Sure, but
is just the pinnacle of mean girl cliches. Like people
I don't know.
Human than that.
People are definitely more human than that. And I agree that no one is all of the popular girl cliches, but I think that again, this is fiction. This is why we have tropes like this, is because for the convenience of the story, we're not going to have you have to understand the humanity of 4 of these high school bullies. We can just have one and she says the mean stuff and then the character feels bad and action happens,
Right. But I'm just saying, because this is one thing that I liked a lot about the To All the Boys movies, is that she was only like a temporary alpha bitch. Like she was friends with her before and then temporarily stopped being friends because they were fighting over a guy. And then, came sort of to blows over social media.
Yeah.
And then that broke, the smoke cleared. And then by the end of the trilogy, they're back to being like good friends again. So I think it's a more true to life sort of dynamic, speaking from an intensely male perspective. But still.
Yeah. I another trope that's definitely common in all of these is like the friend breakup, and then the like friendship reconnect, like the friendship moment, specifically in the kissing booth, we have that with the very dumb like Dance Revolution scene where he's like, come on.
I wonder if that was in the Wattpad novel or if that was added for the film. Because it's such a big part of the sequel. In Kissing Booth 2, it's all about a Dance Revolution competition that has like a huge audience. where everyone's gathered in this auditorium to watch people do performative, and you get scored on style by like judges. It's not
I
just
have
like a
no
high score
idea.
competition. It's
Oh
like
my gosh.
that's factored in. Oh god. And the hot boy that they bring in to be the rival of Noah, he's really good at DDR. He's the best at
Ah,
DDR other than L.
so good. So good at DDR. Which DDR heartthrob will she choose?
Um, but I think maybe we're beating around the bush of like the biggest trope of this movie is the big damn kiss, the first kiss, the virginal kiss that brings you into uh into adulthood, that like cracks the cocoon of
Right.
puberty.
Uh,
um the big kiss in this movie is like a oops, I accidentally kissed this person on purpose because of the
right.
kissing booth and the blindfold and the
Right.
switching people out at the last minute, sort of like trying to
Hijinks.
make it, what if you had to kiss the boy that you liked, not you wanted to kiss the boy that you want to kiss, but what if you had to,
Had to.
they were forcing you to, and the social embarrassment of not kissing them would be worse than the social embarrassment of kissing them. So
Right.
that's like a very teen sort of wish fulfillment thing.
Absolutely.
It's robbing both characters of agency and kind of like smashing them together like Barbie dolls.
I mean, that's definitely what a lot of these teen movies are, because when you don't rob them of agencies, like in Sierra Burgess, it gets a little creepy.
Well, no. I mean, that one, it's also robbing at least one of them of agency
Oh,
because
absolutely.
Sierra
Yeah.
Burgess has to pop out from under a car and kiss the guy while he's blindfolded, but she knows fully
Right.
what she's doing. So
Right.
I get what
It's
you're saying
weird.
there. But what if you just had two characters who wanted to kiss who then decided to kiss? I mean, the reason they don't
Yeah.
do that is because there's no conflict. But
Right.
the conflict is always like, oh, I can't kiss this person. That would be crazy. But then you
Well,
have
because,
to because someone
but,
spun a bottle or they put you in
right.
7 minutes in heaven, or all
Yeah.
the things that we do to mask our actual desires behind socially constructed
Right.
games of
The,
romance to test
the,
it out.
the intricate rituals.
Yeah. Oh, here's one that I think is interesting, and it speaks to kind of the lack of definition to a lot of these characters, the sort of fanficky style of, the
Mm-hmm.
characters are a little self-inserty or they represent people in your real life. And that's the trope is called I love you because I can't control you, which is just
Oh,
based on a line that
yeah.
Noah says where it's like, I like it when you get bossy. And that happens in multiples of these films. The idea
Oh,
that like you're
yeah.
cute when you're bossy, you're cute when
Or it's
you're
like, I'm attracted to you because you're
you're
not
not
a pushover
easy.
to me. Right, exactly.
Right.
Which I think is very
You
Twilight,
talk
like
you talk back to me. Yeah.
that's the whole appeal of Twilight, is that,
Right. But it's
Edward
also 50
can't
Shades.
read.
It's also
Well, I
it's
mean,
like
of course
everything.
it's 50 Shades because it's Twilight, and
Sure.
it's Twilight because, Edward cannot read Bella's mind, and like, so he can't know her, and the not knowing is so mysterious, and it just turns like being a human into a superpower, which is exactly what like teenage girls want in their romance. They want to think that, and I think teenage boys too, the act of just being yourself is super amazing. No matter how bossy you are, how tricky you are, or any of that. And of course, half of these movies, there's always like a trick or a gimmick that's going on, and then you've got to overcome that. That's the major plot conflict.
And then I think for me, one of the most important tropes to a lot of these movies is the missing mom. Where are our moms?
So
Mars
many
needs
dead
moms.
moms.
Netflix needs moms.
I mean, this is like getting worse than Disney. Like
Well,
Disney
but
movies
it's
don't have
I think
moms,
it's
but
I think
like,
it speaks to why nobody whenever they make that observation that a lot of Disney characters have missing or dead moms, they don't try and explain why, and they don't try and like address like why is this like kind of a wish fulfillment for people that they actually want to not have a mother character there, but are okay with like a father figure or something. And it's because these are like coming of age stories,
right?
Where the character feels lost and confused, and a good way to represent that without actually putting in the effort to explain it or define why their childhood would leave them unprepared for adulthood. They simply say they don't have a role model for what adult womanhood looks like, and they portray that by just having a missing mom.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so you see that in Kissing Booth, To All the Boys, not Tall Girl. There was another one though. The Half of
It's
It, where that was missing a mother.
Yeah. I forget. Is Sierra Burgess have parents?
No, she has a mom, but this is the other thing that's common in sort of this other subgenre of these, where it's about the main character feeling like they're ugly or unattractive compared with their mom. So you see that in Tall Girl and in Dumplin, and then also any other
Sierra
one where
Burgess.
they feel unattractive. Sierra Burgess, because her mom is the mom from Back to the Future.
Right.
Again, referencing 80s movies. And her dad is Cameron from Ferris Bueller. So
right.
God, the casting. So stupid. But
so 80s.
But that's the thing, is like the missing mom, I think, is somewhat central to a lot of these, because it's about not having someone to just ask, like, well, what was it like when you started dating boys?
Right, exactly. Or,
what was that about?
Right. And, a lot of these movies are also very straight. Sure. That's definitely, I think, a major trope for a lot of them is definitely the heteronormativity. And
and most of them are pretty white. Yeah.
They tend to be pretty white, which is why I think, especially movies like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, and like The Half of It kind of get a little bit more prestige, is because those two in particular focus on Asian American main characters, and in The Half of It, it's also gay. And it's interesting. We were talking a little bit about what makes these movies prestige, or what makes them sort of campy fun.
And what makes the source material prestige or campy fun.
Right, exactly. And definitely the inclusion of diverse characters or diverse voices, and especially main characters, I think adds an element of prestige to some of these movies that generally rely on similar tropes. Like they are still about teens texting each other and miscommunication. But like it feels novel and is exciting to both those communities and I think general audiences, because we are not oversaturated with movies starring, Asian American characters or Black characters or Latino characters in these romantic roles. And I think, the more that we continue to do this, I think we'll start to see more campy versions of these kinds of films pop up with those kind of characters.
It's what you have with any sort of large scale industry cycle. So the first stage is no one makes rom-coms anymore because no one wants to watch them. And then somebody says, wait, everyone wants to watch this one that has all white people and it's super straight and it's, totally trope-ish and whatever. And then as you make more and more that are more popular, you're like, how can we get more of this demographic? How can we get more of this audience? How can we get more prestige? How can we get less prestige? How can we, touch all the things? How can we get more dramatic and more comedic?
How can we get the gay musical theater nerds in? I know, The Prom.
Right. Can we make a thriller out of this? Like You Get Me.
Right.
Or can we make something that's more of like a musical like challenge, like what was the one Work It or something Work It,
think.
It was like a dance one.
Oh, Step Up. Those are
No,
old
it wasn't
though.
Step Up. It was like Step Up, but like more rom-commy, almost like
But
Pitch Perfect
now.
meets Step Up. Um,
Okay, interesting.
God, I just gotta find it. No, yeah, it's called Work It. I was right the first time.
Okay.
Work It. Produced by Alicia Keys.
No, well,
Okay.
there you fucking go. There's your prestige. Damn. Go off,
Um,
girl.
but yeah, I want to sort of switch gears a little bit. Can we talk about like the types of characters, how they're defined, the commonalities between the trope characters, basically male lead, female lead, and like let's just hit that. So
Sure.
the girls, they tend to be a little self-inserty, but like what character traits do you see repeated across some of these different movies?
They're almost always romantic.
Right.
Like
They love
uh
romantic movies more
right.
than their peers even. They write
Or
love letters to
right.
their, crushes,
Whether
or
whether or
they
not it's
save
movies,
everything.
right, whether or not it's movies or books or like what
Right.
have you. They
Reading
like
reading bodice rippers or
right.
watching
They
romantic
tend
comedies or
they tend to be a little nerdy, they're the like hashtag not like other girls a little bit.
right.
Um
Good in school. Very few are
yeah.
like struggling in school.
Oh yeah, almost none. I don't think any of them are like struggling in school.
Or if they are, we don't
Um
see it. It didn't
right,
make it
it's
into the adaptation.
entirely irrelevant. Um yeah, and like they all have crushes that they're too shy to talk to, but like that's the whole point of the teenage rom-com is you're a teen and
They're all
dating
going
is
to
hard.
college, but some of them are struggling to get money to go to college.
That's true.
And
That's
most of
that's
them
a whole
have
bunch of
no
them.
idea what they're going to study, or are studying something generic enough that it doesn't really, it's, you're not thinking like, well, why aren't they focusing on their schoolwork? None of them are
Right.
becoming nurses or doctors, because then you'd be thinking, why aren't they really buckling down? Why are they so fixated on this stuff? They're like, I'm doing English lit, or history, or one of the soft sciences, or one of the arts, right?
Right.
That's what I see
Yeah.
a lot.
I mean, definitely that. Like a lot of them are self-inserts again. So it's like, what would the person writing this want to go do in college, or
Sure.
like, what's oh, I'm gonna go study physics. Like, it's doesn't need to be particularly defined. But I think that time, like that time pressure of graduation's coming up or prom is coming up, or one of, if the main character isn't a senior, maybe their love interest is a senior, and so they're stressing about where to go and what to do and what will happen. Like some of these are about everyone who's a senior and it's the summer before college and the
Right.
hijinks that ensue
I definitely
there.
got some vibes, the same ones that I got from Marriage or Mortgage, where you're like, make the sensible life decision. Don't go to college based on where your friend is going or where your love interest is. Go to the
Right.
college that you can afford, that has
And
classes
that,
that you want to take, that has faculty that you like, that has a good
yeah,
environment for you. Like, oh my
right.
God, don't choose love and romance over, sensible planning. But I mean, it's the same as in Marriage or Mortgage. They only make that decision about, half the time.
Right, right. Um, uh, yeah, it's,
What about the boys? What
yeah.
about all the boys I've loved
Oh,
before?
they're like all jocks,
All
basically.
jocks, yeah. If they're
They're
not jocks,
all
then you have to explain like why they're so good looking. Like, oh, he's from Sweden, where they're all like that.
right. They just look that way.
Right. I
Um,
mean, and I guess in Dumplin, he's not a jock, but he is a himbo. It's like
he's a himbo.
they're not liked for their intelligence usually, which
Yeah.
I've seen some
No,
like explanations of this that I think are decent. Like there was like a Tumblr post that went viral that was like, people don't want himbos because they like stupid men, but because they like men who don't try and one up them all the time with their intelligence or belittle their intelligence. So, I mean, I think there's something to that as like why like himbos, delightful idiots are kind of in vogue
Yeah.
right now.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
In the same way
Yeah,
that like brainy girls are in vogue right now, nerdy girls are in
absolutely.
vogue. You know,
Yeah.
those pendulums can swing, you know, elsewhere. It's
Hmm.
you know, for a while it was quirky girls, you know, for a while
I mean, I feel like brainy
it
girls are
was
very similar to quirky girls, but
yeah, no, you've got a point. But you know, sometimes it's more like bad boys, sometimes it's more like lovable nerd boys, sometimes it's more like depressed boys, you know, emo boys. You know, like there's
yeah.
different trends and pendulums that swing, but right now
Hmm.
it's himbo zone
It's
for
definitely definitely himbo zone, which I will take. I love the himbo zone.
right. But I
You
think
know,
Noah
they're all
Centineo, he's
generally,
always like a little bit awkward, so like that's why
yeah.
you like him. And whereas like the Noah character in Kissing Booth, he's just like totally cool, like refuses to break the cool vibe.
Yeah.
Um, and he's a bad boy because he punches people and rides a motorcycle.
There you go. That's all
And
you need.
he's a Casanova, you know, he's always hitting on like multiple girls, which is not always
Right.
true for all of these people, but usually they have at least one other romantic interest to be a rival for the lead.
Hmm.
Anything else on the boys?
I mean, they're usually tall, white with brown hair.
All
Like
white, brown hair, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's the general vibe on the
Some like
boys.
sometimes you can go like a little more tan than white, you know, like they're
Yeah, but it's
Latino or they're, you know,
yeah, you
they're
can get a
ambiguously raced
right,
or
right.
ambiguous ethnicity, but you
Yeah.
never want to go, you know, like God forbid, you know,
An
not white,
Asian?
not
Ah,
POC. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, all the right places, you know, he's black,
sure,
in that
yeah,
one.
and he's like
Uh,
a big movie star, so you know, it's like
right.
you know
Um,
there's something to you need to have like that prestige in order to deviate from you know the white peoples.
right. And, you know, also part of this is because most of these are being adapted from white authors.
Right, who are more
Like,
likely to get published, you know,
yeah,
or yeah,
exactly.
much more likely.
Right. I mean, you know, To All the Boys I Loved Before and The Half of It are both notable exceptions, I think, because they are original stories by Asian American women. And
Right, and there's
are
cultural specificity in
right
there more so in the sequel I think than in the first one.
for To All the
um
Boys. Yeah.
yeah, like in the first one she kind of just presents as like her style is like 60s housewife meets like
Influencer.
Instagram influencer.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
baking constantly. uh and then in the second one, you know, they go to Korea and like
Hmm.
there's you know fun with that and
Right.
yeah, lots of more stuff going on in
Yeah.
sequels.
Right.
Sequels often will introduce a rival boy of some kind,
Yes. Yes. Gotta
because you
have a rival
can't,
boy.
right? Or otherwise, they may just have no conflict. Like To All the Boys Always and Forever just has no conflict in it. They forgot to write one. They just said, what if the whole movie is just them being kind of upset about going to different schools? And then nothing else of substance happens in the whole movie.
Yeah, welcome to it's I mean it's YA. That's pretty adapted from the
You know,
book.
but it's like To All the Boys references like Adventures in Babysitting, which is like a teen rom-com adventure, you know, from the
Mhm.
80s that is has a plot, you know, things happen in it. They get chased by mobsters. Just add in some mobsters to some of these or something like, you know, give me something to work with.
I don't know. Are there any other like major tropes? I feel like we've really touched on quite a bit.
Right. I guess the thing that I would want to leave off on is all of these movies about, you know, the insecure girl who thinks that they're really ugly.
Yeah.
None of them have been brave enough to cast somebody who's actually unattractive.
Ugly. No, no.
You know, Dumplin, tall girl,
I mean,
uh,
I would
Sierra
say
Burgess.
Dumplin comes the closest because they did actually cast like a fat woman, you know, like
Right.
a
Well,
fat
but
girl.
she's
But
like
like,
she's still very attract. You know, she's still
right.
Hollywood looking, and I think
Yes.
the reason that Dumplin works more so than like her actual, you know, level of attractiveness, because of course it's like totally believable that the hot guy who works at the burger stand falls for her anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the thing is just that she has really low self-esteem because of her relationship with her mother, who is
Right.
a literal pageant, you know, queen.
Right. Yes.
um and you know, I think Dumplin works a lot better than Tall Girl for that reason, because in Tall Girl it's just that her mom was short and her sister is short, and they're
All Girl is
popular.
the dumbest, most made up, like fucking problem of a
I mean, she looks like a
movie.
model. She's like a
Exactly. Like literally no one in high school would be like, fuck you, you're tall. Like,
right.
sure, I can, I guess, empathize with like I personally never understood the like, ew, I don't date
Well,
guys
you're not.
shorter than
Well,
me.
you're not tall.
But
So.
I mean, I'm very average, but there are definitely men shorter than me. And I know a bizarre number
Right.
of
And there's like
women
so
who will
much
not.
internet
But
discourse about like all the guys are like, no, this is just girls saying that they won't date short guys. And then like the girls are like, no, you don't understand. It's the social pressure outside of the individual boy. And it's about being, you know, fetishized. And it's like there's all these different like angles to it. There's a lot of discourse on it, which is why I think Tall Girl invites such, you know, not vitriol exactly, but just like
I mean,
discussion.
definitely vitriol. Yeah, like I would say, you know, of these movies, um, you know, like there's definitely big fandoms for many of them. But like there's also hate doms, you know, for a
Yeah.
couple of these. Some of these people just don't care about, but like Tall Girl and Sarah Burgess for sure have hate doms. Like you can type in those
Right.
names on YouTube and find a trillion and a half like video essays or takedown videos about like these movies, you
Because I
know?
think they tend to be the characters are a little bit more flawed in addition to being a lot more self-hating or insecure. They do things that are, you know, unlikable, which, you know, it's
Right.
like in the kissing booth, like she can never do anything that's like wrong, even when she's
Right.
like constantly third wheeling her friend and friend's date, you know, to the
Right.
point that they break up. It's like, I didn't know I was doing anything wrong because no one ever told me. And it's like, well, you could have just wrote her like being legitimately inconsiderate and like not thinking that she needs to apologize and then learning something. But you
Right.
chose to have it that she's always in the right because she's self insert, you know, she's
Mm-hmm.
you. Whereas Tall Girl and Sierra Burgess, like, they do pretty despicable things in their pursuit of like guys. Like Tall Girl, she kisses somebody who's dating the you know, the alphabet like hot girl.
Mm-hmm.
um and in Sierra Burgess, she catfishes a dude. um and so I think that invites some of the hate, but it's also just that like
Yeah.
they're so self-hating and so not self-aware about how attractive they are relative to like a lot of the audience.
Yeah.
I think that's
Uh,
a big deal. And it's not like, you know, obviously like fat phobia and like height prejudice and just general like, you know, overly critical you know, or what's the, you know, just like uh
shaming.
body shaming in general is like a
Mm-hmm.
huge issue. But I think maybe it ignites something when you see Hollywood level attractive actors saying,
Yeah.
well, no one could ever love me because I'm so fat. And then the person watching is like, okay, well,
You don't
you're
even know what
Hollywood
fat
fat.
really is. Yeah. Yeah. So it definitely, you know, these movies still fall into those you know, film industry traps around attractiveness, for sure, I think. On the fandom front, I think the ones that tend to have some of the best response are those movies that, like, you know, Netflix is not wrong. If you come into a movie or TV show from an existing IP, you are bringing along fans. And chances are a good portion of those fans are gonna like what you did and are gonna like blog about your movie everywhere. They're gonna tweet about it. They're gonna post about it on Tumblr. They're gonna freak out about it in their fandom spaces, and that's gonna bring new people in who are already of a similar persuasion. So, you know, like To All the Boys I Loved Before has this huge fandom because there already was one. Same thing with, you know, a lot of the John Green movies. Like Sierra Burgess, not as much, because like there's like, I'm sure there are some people who really liked this movie, but like the hate-dom for that is much louder than the fandom. And like The Perfect Date, again, I'm sure there are people who like love this movie, but they are not like still tweeting about it 2 years later, you know, whereas people are still talking about To All the Boys I've Loved Before and are still talking about some of these other films.
Yeah, is it, as far as like hate-doms go, some of it may also be related to the idea that like these are films for teenage girls, the most overly criticized group of consumers on the planet.
Yeah.
They're, you know, stereotyped as frivolous, they're stereotyped as, you know, unserious. There are serious movies on this list. There are movies that should be taken seriously, and even the ones that aren't, I think as like a genre, they're not prestige films, they're genre films, but they embody that genre in creative and interesting ways. And I think that, you know, it can be an instinct to write off the teen rom-com because it's aimed at a demographic that is younger, and younger means less refined or whatever. But no, old people watch terrible movies like Green Book. So, you know, that's my go-to example of like everything about that is prestige. Everything about it is like geared towards an older, more refined, more well-to-do, wealthy audience, and yet terrible movie. So you know, you can't find quality with that. What would you say is like the best hidden gem of these movies that you watched?
Oh God, I mean, the half of it is incredible. I'm obsessed with that movie now. But I think it's almost kind of tangentially related to these. Like it doesn't quite fit the model.
But that can be fine too. I mean, it's often the genre bending or genre twisting or genre breaking films that define a genre for the future.
Like I would say, you know, in the same way that like Juno was very informative for like quirky 2000s like teen movies.
Mumblecore or post mumblecore or whatever you would call it.
Yeah, I don't even know exactly mumblecore's meaning, so I will trust you on that one.
Don't trust me. I was just saying things.
But yeah, I would definitely say I can only hope that not Sierra Burgess, God, that the half of it could be that kind of touching, kind of hidden gem flagship film that I hope inspires more creative and passionate filmmaking in this genre, is what I would say.
And just in order to pick one that's not that, so that there's a second one, I'm gonna go with Dumplin. I think is sort of a hidden gem. I think Jennifer Aniston does really well in her role. I think all the friendships are really neat and interesting, and the incorporation of drag into pageantry as a way of sort of queering the overt straightness of pageantry, I think is really touching, inspiring, maybe a little dated. Like maybe it would be more radical in like the early 2000s. The fact that the adaptation came so late is a flaw of the industry, that the trend wasn't on. But now that it's here, I think still a solid movie, a solid example of the genre that I would recommend to pretty much anybody.
Totally. I agree with you. If you have a favorite teen movie that we didn't discuss, please tweet us.
Or didn't discuss enough.
Or didn't discuss enough. Yeah, tweet us at Talking Tropes, and maybe we'll give it a look-see and dig into it a little bit more, a little media.
Yeah, we're already thinking about doing a little mini episode with a more in-depth look at Sierra Burgess and the half of it. So we'd be happy to do that if people are excited about it, or even if you're not. And
we're gonna do it if you're not.
If you have any other ones that you're like, I really feel like you should have talked more about All the Bright Places or whatever, let us know.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back at you next week with, I believe, a Stanley Tucci. Stanning Stanley Tucci, where we watch all of Stanley Tucci's filmography. We're doing it all. Every inch of Tucci screen time is going to be ours. We'll see you then, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.